So we're learning Byom Ashtei of the Rebbe, 1971. The Maamar said on his birthday, Yudal of Nisan. We're at chapter 5. We learned before the Rebbe's refutation of the argument that the reason why you need a pikach, a smart man to choose the king, is because there's a thought that the stars and the moons and the moon and the constellations are also players with Hashem, because they facilitate the hashpah, the effluence. And the Rebbe rejected that because the fact is that they aren't bali bchira, they don't have choice. So why in the world would someone think that they deserve credit? And number two, if you look at the credit that you're giving them, it's for gashmias. And meaning it serves your purpose. You like sweet oranges and sweet potatoes and sweet cucumbers. And therefore, because it fills a need that a person has, begashmias, physically, materially, you laud them and serve them. That's ridiculous, says the Rebbe, and doesn't say those words, paraphrasing it, because one needs to focus on serving the king. And the Rebbe spoke about that, and that's why chapter 4 is very, very crucial, that the main problem with with people choosing the deputies over the king is that it's self-serving. Let's continue now how he continues this idea in chapter 5 on page 212. The reason for the shrewd one was that he chooses the king over the deputies. The Medrash says the reason is because all change, referring to the ministers, they're here today, gone tomorrow, depends on the elections, Democrats or Republicans, and whoever is voted in by the country is in. So they're not permanent. Mischalef means from the word chiluf, change. And the king is lo mischalef, where here the example I gave is not a good one, because Havdil, a president is not a king, he's also elected. But we mean the Eibishter was the king. Is loy mischalif, doesn't change. The Rebbe says we might be able to explain the intent of the Medrash with this reason. That the effluence coming from the negative side, although quantity-wise, it's much more. As we learned yesterday, the makiv, the klipa, gets more. But yet, it changes. There's no permanence. There's no permanence. After the refinement process, when the sparks that fell into the klippos will be refined, that's how they get their chayas. You hear this? Chaim Zev, how did the klippos get their chayas? From the nitzutzes, kedusha, from the holy sparks within them. So when those sparks will be elevated by a Jew, yizbatul legamri, the klippo will be completely eradicated. Umikoshkein benegel Yisrael, surely regarding Yidden. Next page. Shagam Achshav, that even now, not when Mashiach comes, when the sparks will be eradicated, will be refined, and there'll be the eradication of the klippa, but even now, the fact that Yidden are able to receive vitality from the negative, from the non-Jews, from the Umas, from the Klippas, it's only temporarily. It's only temporarily. So in other words, what he's saying is, listen to Rebbe's argument. We need to look for permanence. That's what the Medrash is saying. Kulu mischalfin, and the melech is loy mischalif. In other words, the Medrash is opening a window into our way of thinking, suggesting to us, as a Jew, as a Yid, you need to look for permanence. And that's the question. Will this hashpah coming from the goyim, i.e. the stars, the moon, the constellations, is a permanent? No. So even the chayas that a Jew gets from Klippa, from Gashmias, which would justify lauding and praising them and hanging on to them, says the Rebbe, no way. Why? Because it's not permanent. It's only lefisha, it's temporary. Next, let's continue. V'cheinu liyidach giz, and so too in the other way, on the other side. The converse is true. The fact that the hashpah, the influence coming from holiness, is limited. So if it's limited, you would think, why go that path? Why latch on to that type of person and the king and all that? I'm only getting a limited amount. Hurak achshav. That's only now, before Mashiach comes. But after this, there'll be the revelation of the pnimius, the Jewish neshama. Its sources from the inner aspect of the encompassing energy called the makiv. Hashpah mehakadusha. The influence from the Kedusha side will be much greater, quantitative. I'm not even talking about qualitatively right now. Quantitatively, more than we're getting now from the external part of the Makiv. Hashayach, next page, Gam lahashpiyah b'klipos, which makes it possible to give to the klipos. In other words, Isser, listen to this guy. The Rebbe is saying that for a moment he says, if you want to argue quantity versus quantity, and you want to say the reason why you should choose klippos is because the quantity is greater, he says, my dear friends, when there'll be the ultimate refinement, and then we will get more quantity from the makiv than the klippos get today. So why hold on to the klippos? Why laud the klippos? Because the klippos get only for what's called chitzonius hamakiv. And we Yidden, and this the Rebbe, I don't know if he says it or maybe we'll say it, because we are pnimius in our very essence, so ultimately we get from the essence the pnimius of klippa, of makiv. So you have this scenario. This is important because you guys learn chassidus, and b'derech klal, generally speaking, the makiv gives more than the pnimi. The pnimi is more reserved, more measured. But that's the chitzonius hamakiv. That's the outer external aspect of the makiv. When you go beyond to the depth of the makiv, which will be when Mashiach comes, we'll experience that, then we too will get more quantity. So therefore, the Rebbe's argument is, why choose the deputies over the king? Why choose the stars and the moons and all that? If at the end, if you latch on to the king, you're also going to get more quantity. It reminds me of the Medrash, which says that there was someone who it was in a desert, and his father, the king, got a hold of him, heard of him, and he was coming to town, whatever. He came out and he says to the people, write down whatever your requests are. This is a Medrash, I believe. And the son, Menashe, okay, Velvel, please mute yourself. So the Medrash says that the king's son was so far, he was sent away, and that he was a shepherd, and in the desert it was very, very hot, boiling. And he didn't have any place to have shade, so he wrote a request, build me a little hut, so that when I need to rest, when I'm not grazing the sheep and all that, I can go into the hut. And the king saw that and he cried out, look how far my son has gone. Instead of asking, even though He didn't know that his father is the king. That's how far removed he was. But he knew a king's coming to town. If a king's coming to town, ask the king, you want to be with the king? Because if you're going to be with the king, not only will you get a little hut, you'll get a palace. You'll get the king will do whatever he needs, whatever you want to give you tremendous shade. Instead, what are you asking for? A little hut. And the mashal given in this is also applicable. Like, we ask for this, we ask for that. Ask for Mashiach. Go for broke. When Mashiach will come, you'll have everything. So too here. If one is going to make the calculation that the reason I'm lauding the stars and the moon and all that is because I get hashpah from them and I get a lot from them because it's from Makif, you'll get even more from the pnimius of Makif, which only a Jew has access to, and which is permanent, which comes with the king. That's his argument, his position. It says the Rebbe, Maamar Azal, Im lo yivir tzoi, if Hashem does good for those that desecrate his will, in this case the Goyim, surely he'll do as much good to those that fulfill his will, the Jews. So the Rebbe now says, sorry, I don't accept this argument, why you should choose the king over the deputies. This explanation is not adequate, according to this. Wow. If this is the argument, then you're saying the reason why he's considered a shrewd fellow, a pikeach, who chose the king, is because he knows he'll get more gashmias. The Rebbe says, how can you say that? That's what it's about. You can't explain the Medrash with this explanation, the Rebbe says, because then he's not a pikeach, he's a damn fool. Why is he a damn fool? Because he's choosing gashmias, and the king will give him more gashmias. That's why you want to be with the king. Let's continue. What would be based on this position that we just said earlier, that the only difference between him, the smart guy, shrewd guy, and the others who chose the dichsin, the deputies, they're only thinking about right now. What can I get more now? And the shrewd one, he thinks about the future. Al derech my Maamar Azal, similar to what Chazal say, who is wise? Someone who sees the future. Who sees the future? So in other words, you know why he's a pikeach? Because he sees the future. In the future, I'm going to get more. But it's all about getting. It says the Rebbe, from the very words in the Medrash. The Zeshi Yisrael, named him HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Medrash continues that the Yidden, right after it says the mashal of the deputies and the shrewd person, it gives the moral. And it says, the fact that Yidden only serve to God and don't worship the constellations, and he quotes the pasuk, Ki chelek Hashem amra nafshi. Ki chelki Hashem. My part, my portion is Hashem, so says my soul. Muchach, these words that the Medrash brings proves the Zesha Pikeach Koiche Boicher Baham Melech, that the fact that the Pikeach, the shrewd person, chooses the king, it's not because of any kind of benefit he'll get from it, it's because of the king. Chelki Hashem Omra Nafshi. My portion is God. That's it. Has nothing to do, is there, with what are you going to get from it? That type of thinking, says the Rebbe, is antithetical to what the Medrash is saying. That's how the Rebbe is learning Pshat in the Medrash. He's using the Medrash's words after it brings the mashal to prove that it's not about I'll get more quantity when Mashiach comes, and therefore I choose the king over the others. It's not about that. It's about the king. Chelki Hashem. If you could say Chelki Hashem Maamar Nafshi, that's the best. Let's continue. V'hainu dezeh sheYisrael boicherin b'Kodesh Baruch Hu. The message is saying the fact that the Yidden choose God, the king, not the deputies, which is the stars and the constellations. Av she'achshav ribuy hashpah he lo'over itzainahu. Although today most of the hashpah, the affluence, goes to those who desecrate. Do you hear this? Why do bad things happen to good people? Here's your answer. That's the way Hashem set it up. That He gives to those desecrators of His will, the bad people, kind of, much more than the good people. The Medrash is saying, you're not a shrewd person, because you realize that ultimately those that do keep His will get more when Mashiach comes. Next page, at page 218, Ella, it's rather only mipnei shehashpah le'eser etzaynoi hu mipnimis etzaynoi yisbarach v'cheftzei amiti. The hashpah coming to those that do His will is from the pnimius. V'hashpah le'ever etzaynoi hu command the shodi basel le'ever etzaynoi, and those that don't do His will, go against His will, are only getting command the shodi basel kaspel etzaynoi, like someone throws a bone, throws behind his back to a person who he hates. He's not at all interested in giving him. He doesn't like him, but he has to pay him his salary. He has to give him. He has to keep him alive. So he puts him into a shelter, etc. Therefore, they want the hashpah that comes to those that do His will. Even though it's a little bit. But it has the virtue that it comes from the inner essence of Hashem, the inner Hashem. So the Rebbe, based on his explanation here, that the idea is the choice of the shrewd person consists of choosing God because Hashem is where it's at. How do you explain the reason? The reason is they all change and this is permanent. That doesn't seem to jive with the reason, with the statement that you choose Hashem, because Hashem is Chelki Hashem, Maamar Nafshi. The Rebbe explains. What is the meaning in the Medrash? Next page. The fact that they later will change, muchach, this proves that even now, Eina Mitzias Amitis, they are not the ultimate true existence. And the fact that the Klippa is able to give effluence to animals and to non-Jews, it's not on their own doing, they could make that choice. Ella, next page. It's because they nourish from Kedusha. And because they have some kind of nourishment from Kedusha, look further. The Chayas, you hear this well? The Chayas within the Klippa is never at peace with the Klippa. There's no unity, there's no achdus between the Chayas in Klippa and Klippa. It finds itself there because Hashem says, I need to keep it going for free will, for whatever the reason is. And it's like throwing the bone behind the back. But there's no achdus, there's no unity, there's no meshing in a smiling, pneumistic way between the chayas of Hashem, the God's energy, and the Klippa. But the Rebbe says in the parentheses, this chayas of Hashem is exiled within the Klippa. Now, you hear the point. Hashem says, I need to give it to them to keep it going, but it's still considered golus. In other words, when you are in a situation, listen to this, Kevin, when you're in a situation where you have to do something and you really don't want to do it, and you're there, you're in golus. You have to do it because if you don't do it, it will be a problem. But yet you're really not there. You're not happy about it. You don't want to be there. So you're in Golos there. The same as with the Chayas. The Chayas of Kedusha that inserts itself into Klippa, and subsequent to that, Klippa gets so much influence, is not happy about being there. It's in Golos. Let's continue. Meaning that from the perspective of the Klippas are dead. They're really, right? Chayas is what life is all about. Energy, or, right? And if we're saying that the Chayas of Kedusha doesn't want to be in the Klippa, that means Klippa on its own is Movis, is dead. And this consciousness extends itself to those that receive their Chayas from Klippa. Kimavur b'Tanya, as it says in Tanya, I think. The fact that wicked people, while they're alive, that this is the meaning of what Chazal say, that Rishoyim, wicked people, even while they're alive, Kriyim Mesim, they're called dead people. It's because their energy comes from a place of death and contamination, spiritual contamination. So this is the meaning of the Pikeach who says, I won't go that route. Rather, I will attach myself to the king. Mishum de Kulam is Chalvim, because everyone else, the deputies, they're here today, gone tomorrow. The shrewd person doesn't want he's not interested in influence coming from a place of death. Vatuma, next page, and contamination. Again, even though there's a lot. No, I mean, I don't want to say it, it's not nice, but like having a lot of chayas, I'll tell you in a moment. One second. And the Pikeach and the Shudu one specifically, the Hashpah from the perspective of Kedusha, even though it's so little, it's minute. The famous anecdote that Chassidim would say, and whether it happened, it probably happened. I could see it by who happened. One time I hear it about this chassid, one time I hear about this chassid. And they say that the chassid was walking there in Moscow. He came from a little village somewhere in Russia. And all of a sudden, comes and he sees these larger buildings. You know, Moscow was already building buildings and tall buildings. He comes to his mashpia and he says, wow, this is like what's going on? This is very impressive. So the mashpia said to him, what does it say in Kabbalah? It says that Olam Hazeh, the physical material world, is the excrement of the Malachim. Do you know that it says that in Kabbalah? Right? Everything in Gashmias has a counterpart in Ruchnias. I'm not joking. So in Kabbalah it says the psoilus is the excrement. The psoilus of the angels of the Malachim is the Gashmias. So the Mashpia said to him, you're right, they're tall buildings, but until now the Malachim, they expressed themselves in a little way, and now they made a big one. You know, these, some people, even Chassidim have a hard time, but in Chabad, these sharp remarks, it's not only Chabad, there are other Chassidim also that can be sharp, Kotzk, others, but there's a point to it. It's not just to, it's to bring out how the world is nothing. And all you see a lot. It's a lot of excrement. That's all it is. And that's what the Rebbe with that, is not, using this, of course, but that's in a sense what he's saying. And the Pikeach, that's what he saw. And that's why he chose the king. He said, why would I want to have more of excrement? Are you crazy? But it tastes good, it feels good, but it's all excrement of the Malachim. It's Taka Malachim, there's an association with Chayas, but at the end of the day, it's schmutz. At the end of the day, it's nonsense. So isn't it better to have a little of Kedusha than a lot of Klippa? And that's what we have to think about. We're going into Purim, just the 2 words about Purim, and we'll continue Shem Wednesday. The next chapter, just to tell you that Purim is about V'napachu. It's the day when Mamish, if you connect properly, things turn upside down in the way where there's a transformation. And this is true for health, and for Shidduchim, and Parnosa, and everything. This has been seen over and over. And I'll repeat to you what my Mashpia Rabbi Yoel Khan would tell us when Chevra would, get themselves shikker and make themselves silly. Rabbi Yoel would say, leave the frivolity and the shikkerness and all that buzz for Tisha B'Av. And Purim is a serious day. It's a serious day of focus. Of course, you're supposed to be happy. You're supposed to adloyada. But the point is that this isn't just a party. Partying. It's you want to say, you have to say l'chaim. That's what it says in halacha. But with a focus, it's and if you want to make yourself silly, laugh at Tisha B'Av. That when I'm crying, of course we're crying, but how long are we going to cry for? It's a word that he said that I thought was a very profound insight. So just help bear it in mind. Maybe should help us. We should have a Freilichem Purim and a Zisem Purim. And it's a 24-hour day period, so it's, don't waste it. Don't waste that day from early morning till evening. Purim Suda, Takasei L'chaim, and invite other people that maybe are shut in. Bring Shalach Manas to people, and, the mitzvahs. Everyone have a great Purim, great Shabbos. We'll see everyone to Shem on Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.